This week marks a major milestone for one of the biggest mascot stars of the 90s. No, not that one. Or that one. Never that one. No one is ever talking about that one. Okay, fine. There are a lot of mascots in the 90s. I'm talking about Gex. Limited Run Games is releasing a Gex Trilogy across PC and consoles, allowing players to revisit the wisecracking Gecko's adventures into the media dimension. With a new light on the reptilian rascal, we decided to take a look back at the history and legacy of Gex. In 1994, Crystal Dynamics was on the hunt for a standout mascot to represent their company because, well, it was 1994. Lyle Hall, a designer who had recently joined the team, fleshed out a Hollywood stunt gecko named Gecko X, which eventually evolved into the literal fourth-wall-breaking Gex, hopping between TV worlds and entertaining players with his signature commentary and humor.
For me? You shouldn't have.
It would be easy for this type of character to fall flat. Audiences had seen it before to various effects.
What could possibly go wrong?
But Crystal Dynamics brought in comedian Dana Gould to punch up the dialogue and voice the character, leading to a distinct personality and sophistication of humor often missing from other games. In April of 1995, the original Gex launched as a 2D side-scrolling adventure for the 3DO, intended to be the new system's must-buy game. However, the 3DO failed to get a foothold in the market, and with a much higher price than many consumers were willing to pay, Crystal Dynamics ported the game to PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and PC. Interestingly enough, only the 3DO version had internal memory saves, the later ports relying on the increasingly outdated password save system instead. The vibrant graphics were cutting edge for a 2D platformer of that era, taking a page out of Rare's Donkey Kong book with pre-rendered graphics, but performed through a sharper 32-bit lens. Reviewers were generally positive on the game, noting that the gameplay and design were fun, if not on par with many other platformers. But it was Dana's work infusing his voice and wit into the character that put it over the edge. Gex was praised as a true talking video game character, which made him stand out amongst his peers.
This one's for Keith Moon!
It was the best-selling game on the 3DO, and while that success didn't quite translate amidst the larger libraries of the Saturn and PlayStation, it was certainly enough to warrant a sequel. With the release of Super Mario 64, the art of the 2D platformer started to take a back seat for the revolution that was the third dimension. Not willing to be left behind by his fellow mascots, Crystal Dynamics announced in 1997 that the upcoming Gex sequel will in fact be a 3D collectathon, while still holding on to what made Gex Gex: climbing walls, the tail whip, his Yoshi-like tongue, and Dana Gould's signature one-liners.
To see the world as Keith Richards does.
This also allowed for new avenues of parody, like more themes and costumes to match the levels. In 1998, Gex Enter the Gecko was released across North America and Europe for the PlayStation, kicking off with a much wider audience than its previous 3DO launch, a system that, by this point, had become extinct. This was later ported to PC, rebranded on the N64 as Gex 64, Enter the Gecko, and even saw a 2D Game Boy Color version, ensuring Gex could be in as many hands as possible. The initial release of Enter the Gecko was well received by fans and critics alike, stating it as a solid, fun platformer that kept the spirit of what made the original Gex so special. It didn't reinvent the genre, but it didn't necessarily need to either. The Nintendo ports did not fare so well. The cartridge limitations of the N64 meant that the full-motion video cutscenes and more risque lines had to be cut. This was given an E for everyone rating as opposed to the teen rating of the PlayStation version. The Game Boy Color version fared worse, with many stating that the game lost a lot of character without the wisecracking voice of Dana Gould. However, the success of the franchise allowed the character to be in the same conversation as Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and others, even if it was more in the back, and warranted Crystal Dynamics to come in with a third and final game. The third game, Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko, released for the PlayStation in mid-1999, with an N64 port releasing later that year. Notably one of the last platformers for both systems as this generation of consoles began to come to a close. Much like the previous game, Gex 3 Deep Pocket Gecko was also released for the Game Boy Color, a strategy often used by most franchises at that time. Taking on a spy movie motif thanks to the cultural success that was Pierce Brosnan's James Bond, this third entry saw Gex working as a secret agent to save his partner, Agent Extra, portrayed through live-action FMV cutscenes by former Baywatch actress and Playboy playmate Marlise Andrade. Dana Gould would once again return to help write and voice our lead, but things were different in the UK. As a matter of fact, the PAL versions of Gex regularly changed actors, with Dana's voice being used in the original, British comedian Leslie Phillips adapting the dialogue to his own brand of comedy in Enter the Gecko, and finally, Danny John Jules, best known for playing Cat on Red Dwarf, taking the mantle for Gex 3. To match the spy theme, Gex 3 continued its 3D platforming evolution by adding the occasional vehicles and gadgets to match the theme. Things like riding in tanks and high-octane snowboard segments were added to help fit the various TV channel themes. They also expanded the cast a little bit. On top of the inclusion of Agent Extra, we saw new minor characters show up for some bonus levels, like Rex the Dinosaur and Cuz, Gex's cousin. Deep Cover Gecko's reception was relatively positive, but due to market saturation, the bar for 3D platformers had risen. Much like the 2D era before it, most games in the genre were becoming somewhat formulaic, and Gex was no exception. Between this and being a late console release across the PlayStation and N64, Gex 3 didn't quite garner the attention its previous entries did. With the PS2 and GameCube respectively on the horizon, it was a little hard to get excited for a repeat visit to the previous media dimension. That's not to say they didn't try to evolve. With new consoles on the horizon, a fourth Gex game was planned for the PS2 and allegedly the GameCube in the early aughts. Eidos, who owned the IP at that time, ultimately canceled the project due to a perceived lack of interest, although certain concepts were taken and eventually folded into 2003's Whiplash, an unrelated title about a weasel and a rabbit chained together. Crystal Dynamics still viewed him as their mascot, however, and despite his story coming to a perceived end, it was still occasionally making cameos as unlockable characters in games like Hot Shots Golf 2 and the Xbox racer Mad Dash Racing. Notably, Gex would not be heard from again until 20 years later. Whispers on the wind began uttering the Gecko's signature one-liners when a previously unknown prototype demo of a game was leaked online in 2022 titled Gex Jr. Apparently, this was an unannounced spin-off from 2001 for the original PlayStation, featuring a younger, juvenile Gecko in his own adventure. Likely a pitch that never saw the light of day, it's certainly an interesting look into what could have been if Gex had continued. After decades off the air, Gex is finally poised for a comeback. Limited Run Games, in partnership with Square Enix, who bought the IP holder Eidos in 2009, announced the Gex Trilogy, a remastered compilation of all three main Gex games. The remaster is planned for release on all major modern platforms, both digitally and with physical editions, including the Tail Time Edition, complete with a statue, remote pin, inflatable Gex doll, and more. The game includes a few quality-of-life enhancements like updated controls, widescreen compatibility, and a museum mode presumably filled with art and behind-the-scenes info. What started as a bandwagon hop for a failing console became a brief cultural icon that maintained a small cult following throughout the 90s. From his humble origins at Crystal Dynamics to his rise as a multi-platform star, longtime fans and newcomers will be able to rediscover Gex's journey when the Gex Trilogy hits shelves this week. And who knows, this may not be the series finale, but the start of a new season for the rascally reptile.
I'm thinking I'm back.
What do you think? Is it tail time once again for gaming's greatest Gecko? Let us know in the comments, and keep watching Game Rant for the past, present, and future of gaming.